Hey folks, welcome back. I know that this is probably the topic that most people are interested in, so I figured I might as well lead off with it. Skills are a pretty interesting thing to look at over time because initially all we had to go off of was what was written on the skill themselves, and the initial descriptions were even worse than they are right now. At least they have improved those a little bit. But we initially will read the skills, we'll have our ideas of where they go, and then we'll discuss it within our own spheres, be that our clubs or a Discord channel or Facebook groups. And if you're discussing it within a club, you're probably going to be a little bit protective of your ideas, but eventually what'll happen is those ideas will start to bleed out into the other groups, and then at that point then it becomes common knowledge and everybody starts adopting or following the pattern. So that progression would be, you have something you think works, you think a particular skill is good, you go ahead and test it out, you confirm it with other people, then your other club members or other friends start to adopt it, and then other people see that, and eventually everybody else uh, catches on and starts adopting the skills. Now, I like to back what I say with data, and fortunately for me, I don't actually have to do too much work in this because this fellow over our Metstro's Analytics channel actually did some analysis of previous ranked tournament results and did assessment of skills, and he did drew some good conclusions, accurate conclusions about usage in the upper echelon of players, and what he found largely represents my experience as well. I'm going to show that in the next couple slides. Now, some of his findings, you're not going to see some of the things I mentioned in the previous slide, where somebody might be experimenting with something hasn't gained widespread adoption and recognition that a particular skill is good. Those things don't reflect in the tourney results as much. So you're going to largely only see things that are commonly adopted. And once again, these mirror my personal experiences, and let's take a look at these on the next slides. Now let's take a look at how skills have been used since the origination of the game and over time through the various editions, etc. Starting in the left, if we look at initial, that means those are the skills that were initially in the game, then a few new gold skills were added at one point, and then the introduction of the legend skills, and then more recently last year they revamped all the skills for adjusting and scaling of ability scores, etc., like that. And then we are several months later now at today, and things have changed a little bit further since then. Let me put a pause in that just to interject a little bit of soapbox here to stand on. People keep referring to things like your power rating, your contact rating, and your eye rating, these types of things as stats. These are not stats. Stats are things that you acquire, and through data that you acquire by performing the task. You get a hit, that's a stat. You get a batting average, that's a stat. What we have in this game are ability scores or ratings of a player. They are not stats. Those are not acquired data points. Anyways, getting back to the skills at hand here. Starting on the left, it quickly became obvious that Last Boss was a dominant skill, and this back then the favored set was, if you could land a Last Boss with cleaning up your mess, you were in good shape. That's what everybody was shooting for on their starting pitchers. Some people were using Untouchable with cleaning up your mess, and a few people tried Last Boss with Untouchable. Untouchable never really performed as well as we wanted it to, but hey, if that's what you got, you did use it. Now, notice how Ace is down on this list. Early in the game, your ability score scaling, or stat scaling as the case may be, never really worked. It topped out, and in fact, people would argue that they saw worse results from using Ace on a pitcher than if they weren't using ace, that it would actually draw down your pitching performance. And so ace for a very long time has been a shunned skill. It was considered to be garbage and should be avoided. It looked good on paper. People who are new to the game would look at, oh, it's boosting my ability scores, I will use that, and not realizing that it was actually garbage. So with the introduction of new gold skills, we got to see finesse pitcher and dominant pitcher, and it was quickly identified that the combination of last boss and finesse pitcher was dominant. It was those two skills used together were preventing a lot of hits. Now, you back that up with what is the only other solid skill that you want behind that? Cleaning up your mess. You wanted to prevent people from getting on base such that if the home run was hit, you weren't seeing a lot of runs scored. So in the early days of the game, games were decided by solo home runs. And this becomes relevant and important as we start to look at how the skills have changed. So last boss, cleaning up your mess, finesse pitcher, were primary skills with the introduction of the new gold skills. Dominant pitcher was recognized as potentially being strong, but it just never seemed to perform as well as finesse pitcher. So finesse pitcher was the one that people were seeking. And then untouchable was kind of like an add-on there. If that's what you landed, maybe untouchable with finesse pitcher and cleaning up your mess, then some people were running with that because, that's what the cards dealt you. With the introduction of legend skills, things shook up a little bit more because all those gold skills had to be pushed down a tier, and they became secondary skills to your primary skill, which was quickly identified as being control master. That was the dominant skill, and shortly thereafter, slow starter was recognized as performing really well. Once again, this is in the age of solo home runs still dominating games and determining who is going to win. Everybody recognized that Fireballer should be theoretically perform as well as Control Master, but it just never seemed to. For those who remember Pitching Master, that was a silver skill. How for some reason it always used to outperform the equivalent golden pitcher, which affected velocity control. Golden pitcher never did as well as pitching master, which was fastball and break. Nobody could explain why. It just never did as well. And for the same reason, Fireballer has never seemed to live up to what Control Master is doing for pitchers. Now, everybody also recognized that pitcher's chemistry is something you wanted once. Thereafter, it became a D rating. Cooperative pitching never performed very well in the initial incarnation that we got. Bullpen day, pretty much people recognize as that's what you want in your bullpen. So as a bullpen item, it's S tier, was S tier at the time. And for anybody else, non-bullpen, you do not want to be using that. And Pitcher's Insight never really performed in the earlier days, and so people pretty much avoided that one. So with assuming now that you have a black skill or a legend skill of one of the preferred ones, what are you going to back that up with? Last Boss was still the premier skill. If you could land that in conjunction with one of the others, then that was where a good starting point. Now, after Last Boss, what are you going to back that up with? Well, Finesse Pitcher was still strong. So Finesse Last Boss plus Control Master or Slow Starter, that was optimal. If you got stuck with Untouchable and Finesse Pitcher and Control Master, for example, people were running with that too, because that's what the cards dealt you. At this point, dominant pitcher started to see more usage, but it still never quite performed as well as finesse pitcher. But people started using it. Now, with the revamp, things have changed significantly. Well, substantially, but not amazingly. So just to refresh everybody's memory, with the revamp, the whole idea of scaling your ability scores up, or your stats up, became more viable. They removed the glass ceiling that was there before, and things that boosted your stats became more relevant and impactful. And on top of that, they revamped all the skills, especially the black skills, the legend skills, in addition to what they were doing before, they added on some type of stat increase. or ability score increase, and that made things that were previously garbage at least somewhat usable in players that landed at good skill levels on those skills that they were seeing. So after the revamp, Control Master, Slow Starter are still regarded as strong ones. Fireballer, once again, not quite to the level, not quite an A. Maybe it should be an A, but B plus, not quite an A in my mind. Pitcher's chemistry is still something everybody wants, but not more than one. Cooperative pitching, people started to recognize is actually doing okay now. So it started an upsurge. Bullpen day, people started to recognize that Control Master was actually doing as well. And so Bullpen Day wasn't the premier skill in the bullpen anymore. It's still preferred over other things, but not quite, in my mind, not quite at S level. I'm going to give it to you. Some people will argue it's still an S level bullpen skill. But given that bullpens are so hard to get working properly, uh, I'm putting it as an A, and maybe that's just from bad experience. Okay, Pitcher's Insight also has started to see some upsurgence at this point in time. Not quite. People are starting to experiment with it. Most people are wary of Pitcher's Insight. Even to this day, people are still wary of Pitcher's Insight, but it actually started to see some usage, but not very much. The other skills largely hold true. And by this time, notice that cleaning up your mess has fallen off in popularity substantially. The idea and the concept of a one-run game um, being there and preventing multiple runs by a home run, scoring multiple runs by using cleaning up your mess, that kind of fell out in favor of trying to prevent the initial hit. And how are you going to prevent the initial hit? You're going to be using like something that's active all of the time, like Last Boss, Untouchable, Dominant, or Finesse. So people were seeking to get rid of something that was conditionally activated, cleaning up your mess, only active when people are on base, and trying to get things that were active all the time to prevent the initial hits. Now, I'll mention this in a little bit again in a little bit, but I think things are changing around that. Now, going over today, especially when you start to look at the club tournament and the teams that were successful in there and the skills that they were sporting, we still see Control Master as dominant. Slow Starter is still in heavy usage, but not quite to the level that it used to be. So it's fallen off just a little bit. Fireballer is still the third skill there. Pitcher's chemistry still everybody one of those per team. Cooperative pitching has started to see more and more usage. Generally, if you've got a high set of skill set, high levels on your skill set, uh, cooperative pitching becomes viable. Personally, I have a max set on that, and it performs quite well on one of my pitchers. So I've been keeping it, and other people are recognizing that too. Bullpen day, same notes as before. Pitcher's Insight becomes interesting now with stat scaling. And I'm going to mention this again in another slide, I believe. Or am I? Anyways, heck, I'll mention it right now. So if you stack Pitcher's Insight with Last Boss, you are going to get a double effect. And if you can land both of those skills together, Pitcher's Insight actually starts to become more viable, especially in high skill levels. If you have a full 3-3 set, Pitcher's Insight becomes valuable. Okay, cleaning up your mess is starting to see a turnaround, and Untouchable as a means of countering a boss nerf is also starting to see an upsurge. We'll start talking about that more in the meta game. Now, with stat or ability score scaling becoming viable, people have recognized now that Ace is actually a very strong skill to have. So most people are seeking at least one ace on their skill, or one ace skill on their pitchers. More than one falls off, and some people have argued or told me that they have decent experiences with two. And then I've also heard the counter that the moment they added the second ace, then their primary pitcher fell off significantly. So your mileage may vary on that one, but at least one ace, one solid ace is good, if not almost required. And finesse and dominant have more or less risen to be equal. Finesse still performs a little bit better, but people are accepting dominant a lot more because it's too hard to only optimize for finesse. So let's move on to batting skills now. Using the same format, let's take a look at batting skills now. How in the initial game things established what were strong skills, and over time, charisma has maintained itself as a premier skill at the gold level. The interesting one here is Slugger's Instinct, I would say. That and Legend, which is very impactful lately. But Slugger's Instinct back then, once again, we're talking about the days of the single run home runs winning a game, right? Slugger's Instinct, alongside Charisma, was the skill set people were looking for on their batters. At this point in time, we weren't chasing triple skills yet. So if you got those two, that your batter was done. If you couldn't get Slugger's Instinct and you landed with Charisma and Batting Machine, given that there was really nothing any better, much better or below, then people were accepting Batting Machine. But Slugger's Instinct was definitely the one people were searching for. Initially, people rated prediction really low. Slowly over time, people began to realize that it really does strongly affect on base percentage, so they started to using it a little bit more. Maybe it doesn't deserve a B, because not as many people noticed this, but prediction was viable in the initial set compared to some of the other skills. Now, looking at Ace Killer or a Specialist, Master Base Thief, these types of things, never really have done very well. The interesting one here is, as I mentioned, Legend, or now 5-tool player. Um, Similar to Ace, as a stat booster or ability score booster, it just didn't scale. And it just didn't translate into good results with your batters. So people pretty much avoided that skill. Now, with the introduction of new gold skills, we saw Spotlight introduced, which was quickly identified as being pretty much on par with Charisma as far as preference, especially considering we were then still shooting for solo home runs and we are in late game, and Spotlight is the difference between getting a solo home run against an otherwise scoreless game. Spotlight was quickly recognized as being a premier skill, and people were trying to double up on Charisma, Spotlight, and something else to back it up. At that point in time, the backup skill would have been Slugger's Instinct or Batting Machine or Barrel It Up. At this point in time, Barrel It Up, people were starting to realize was a pretty strong skill, but most people are thinking it was roughly equal to Batting Machine. Now, with the introduction of Legends, the two ones that rose up to the top quickly were Bad Ball Hitter and Pioneer, still viewed today as being the premier skills for Legend skills. If you got those in conjunction with at least one of the other A or S rank, then you're in pretty good shape. So chemistry, obviously you want. The other legend skills were pretty much garbage. People recognized that, and nobody used them. Uh, yeah, pretty universally, nobody was using them. Uh, just combine Bad Ball Hitter and Charisma, Bad Ball Hitter, Slugger's Instinct, and Batting Machine. These types of things were done commonly. And then Spotlight and Barrel It Up. At this point, Barrel It Up was becoming more obvious that Barrel It Up was a little bit more potent than Batting Machine, so it gets an A over Batting Machine at this point. Now, with the introduction of the revamped skills and changing the skills so that ability scores would scale better, removing the glass ceiling, things shook up a little bit. The two premier legend skills, once again, they've remained, but other skills saw the addition of stat boosts in addition to the capacity that they already had, or some minor changes to the capacity they already had. So things suddenly, like for example, Chance Maker, which previously only affected the base runners, suddenly now gave a stat bonus to the hitter itself, and suddenly that becomes viable if it's on a high skill set on a player. So people are no longer poo-pooing on Contact Master, Chance Maker, Batter's Insight, and Born to be a Star. In fact, Born to be a Star is actually proving to be a little bit more popular than the others. So Slugger's Instinct at this point is starting to fall off. Games aren't one-run games anymore. It's not, home runs aren't dominating things anymore. So at this point, Slugger's Instinct is falling off. And in fact, some people would tell you that their batters suffer a little bit more and perform worse with Slugger's Instinct on them. And hence, most people are starting to skill away from Slugger's Instinct at this point. Batting Machine, depending upon who you talk to, people call it garbage. Other people say it's still decent. Personally, I'm in the camp of it's still decent. I will use Batting Machine. I've had very good results with some of my hitters with it, so I've kept it. Prediction is still a good skill. In fact, I would actually rate this a B. I have two hitters. My best two hitters on my team are both using prediction. And so a lot of people will overlook prediction, but I would call that an underrated sleeper skill right there. Master Base Thief also got a stat boost, so it moved up from D to a C, but in testing, it was fairly inconsequential. I tried it on two different players, hasn't performed well, and I haven't seen a lot of usage of Master Base Thief, so that would lead me to believe other people are seeing the same results. Ace Killer, Ace Specialist, that one still garbage. Now, here's where people started to recognize with the revamp that 5-tool player is actually starting to become a useful skill. And people are starting to actually use this to try and boost up their stats on their players, and we'll revisit this on a later slide. Spotlight's still strong. Barrel It Up has, once again, it's raised itself to the A level. I would I would bet that you would hear from a lot of people that the optimal skill set is going to be bad ball hitter plus charisma, and charisma would paired with probably barrel it up. Doubling up on charisma and spotlight is yeah, it works, but you do sacrifice a little bit in the other bonuses. So charisma with barrel it up. Personally, I would choose that over charisma and spotlight. Charisma is preferable to Spotlight because Spotlight is conditional. So maybe Spotlight should actually be an S minus, but it's still strong. It's still helpful, and so that leads us up to today. Today is largely the same. Born to be a Star has increased in popularity even more. Batter's Insight, Contact, Master have been recognized to actually perform on some players. Some people are seeing good results with those. And Chance Maker uh, is better than it used to be, but it's still not amazing. It's just better. Slugger's Instinct continuing to fall off in popularity. Fewer and fewer teams are using that. Most people have skilled away from it. Predictions has raised a little bit. People are starting to recognize what I was saying, and it's in more usage these days. And then last on the list is laser beam. There's been some experimenting. I'll talk about this a little bit later. In some cases, laser beam can be desirable, and some people are shooting for that. Okay, so how did we arrive here, and what does it take to identify these skills? Let's talk about that next. How we are here today and how we have arrived at the skills that we use today is something that has evolved over time, because initially, essentially, when we only have the skill descriptions to go off of, which thank God they've been improved lately, so we actually have a little bit more. Initially, they were utter garbage. But initially, until proven otherwise, each skill is essentially garbage. But in reading, you can identify which likely are going to be good skills. And in order to prove that, we've had to use them, test them, use them in combination with other skills, and try and figure out what is actually good. And over time, people have tried various things, with some things actually being successful and other things actually not being successful. Some of the things that I've seen used in the past with mixed results are we'll cover here just now. So, for example, an item that really never worked very well that people tried was using It Ain't Over, the silver skill, which boosts you when you're behind, on pinch hitters, such that a late game pinch hitter would be introduced. You get a huge boost from pinch hitting, and it ain't over yet, and hopefully score that difference making home run. Never really took off, never really worked that well. Tanking for easy wins. I guess this really isn't skill related, but it is something that people were doing for a while, which is taking out all their strong players, putting in a garbage lineup, dropping intentionally losing a bunch of games, restoring their strong lineup, and then playing a bunch of teams, potentially multiple refreshes, to win a whole slew of games, and then repeating the process. Uh, Something that also was experimented with was based off of a very obscure line in the Com2 documentation about skills. There was a statement that your total defensive or your defensive rating was driven by the total fielding score of all your fielders combined. Now, this was pointed out to be by a club mate, Dodgers knew at the time, now Hat Trick, this obscure line. Now, I don't know if I can credit him with actually finding it, but he pointed it out to me and the rest of our club that theoretically our defense would be boosted, and therefore the opponent should theoretically score less runs if we had a certain level of fielding cumulatively across our players, and that included the bench. So the experiment was, and that what we tried for a while, was to put as high a fielding rating as possible on your bench, with the purpose of boosting the fielding of the overall team to hopefully get you to the level in which you were seeing better defensive results because of this one obscure line in docs. Now, looked at in isolation, you see a team that's going in and has players that are with boosted fielding, you're going to think they're stupid. You're going to look at them and you're going to go, okay, that's dumb. Why are you boosting fielding? But in isolation, yeah. But if you had the insider info and you knew this type of thing, then suddenly it makes sense. Now, granted, it ended up being not fruitful. It wasn't ever stupid, but it was never proved to be fruitful. So be careful what you label as stupid, because depending upon how you look at it, it might not be. Another thing that was tried, or actually done for quite a while, is playing the game and optimizing around home runs. And this was the usage of Slugger's Instinct and training your players to boost power to the max in hopes that you were going to land that difference making solo home run and win those games, which were very low scoring at the time. That was pervasive all the way up until the skill revisions and the rebalancing and the boost of offense. Another thing that is in practice today, and in fact, most teams are actually doing this. So this was tried and then adopted, and people pretty much do this, and that is adjusting your lineup to avoid the use of pinch hitters. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this, your hitting positions 6, 7, 8, and 9 will get pinch hit, are the only ones that will get pinch hit for. So meaning the other positions are safe. So 6, 7, 8, 9 may get pinch hitters if there's a bench player whose primary position matches that of the 6, 7, 8, or 9 hitter. So if you have a right field, left field on the bench, and you have a position 9 hitter who's left field, which is the secondary position of the bench player, that person would not get pinch hit for. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I've been told recently that has changed. I've not seen evidence of it or proof of it. It still seems to behave following the rule that I laid down, but I've also been told that they've revamped it such that the substitutions will occur on a secondary position. So please comment in the comments and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the rule still holds true. Secondary positions will not be subbed for. So if you put positions that don't match your 6, 7, 8, and 9 hitters, you will never put a weaker player into pinch hit. You'll always get the strong ones. Okay, so that one's in practice. There is a third tier mentor skill called crisis that some people are choosing to optimize around. The crisis skill says if you have not achieved any hits and you have a hitter in your on your bench that matches the current hitter, that player, the first hit of the game, will get a boost. Now, if you optimize around that, you could potentially ensure that all of your lineup gets a boost up until their first hit. Now, in sacrificing your entire bench, well, maybe it's not sacrificing if you're never getting pinch hitters, but anyways, changing your entire bench just for the sake of one particular hitter, I tried it for a while, didn't see significant results, so I'm not doing this. But if you look at the club tourney, the recent club tourney, and you take a look at some of the teams and you find teams with that the Arizona Diamondbacks player who's a catcher, Dalton, I think. Dalton, I forget his last name. Anyways, who's also an outfielder. The reason he's in these teams as an Arizona Diamondback is so that they can activate this crisis thing. And so people are doing that. The last thing I should mention, probably should have put a bullet here for, is some people are downplaying their team OVR by putting junk players onto the bench to lower the team OVR in hopes that when they are matched up in ranked play, there is less of a disparity between OVR and they don't get penalized for having a higher team OVR than their opponent, with the theory being that a higher OVR team gets some type of penalty against it. I haven't seen any evidence that proves that this works. I did try it for a little bit, saw no difference in results, but some people are trying that. So it's an example of an experiment or a theory craft that people are trying to see if it actually works. And some of them work and some of them don't. So where does that leave us today? Let's take a look at the meta next. Okay, so the change or the revamp of all the skills last year has really shaken things up in the meta of ranked, and skill usage is changing over time since then, and is progressively changing more as people recognize some of the things that have happened. Now, pervasive across ranked play at the upper tiers, boss nerfing is probably 70% of the teams are nerfing boss, and the other ones are probably doing charisma. And so the current meta is, how do I minimize the impact of a boss nerf against my team? Well, the first and most obvious thing is to reduce the number of starting pitchers you have that have boss. But how are you going to do that when it's such a strong skill? You're going to find that most of the top teams have 3 to 5 starting pitchers that have boss on it. But more and more are starting to opt for pitchers with something else instead of boss, like untouchable, ace, which you should be having anyways, at least one ace in your starting rotation, and or potentially doubling up on finesse pitcher with dominant pitcher. And the reason I mentioned pitcher's insight in here is pitcher's insight in combination with boss will nerf skills excessively. I mean, it's really impactful. So pitcher's insight on its own may not be great, uh, unless it's on a high skill set. So if you have a max skill set with pitcher's insight, then definitely go with that. And if you can combine that with boss, even against the boss nerf, it's still going to be effective. So that's a potential counter to the boss nerf as well. Now, the next thing in meta is that, and I mentioned this before, small ball is impacting games. We're not relying on the home run anymore. The scores are a lot higher. We're seeing a lot more base runners actually come around to score off of small ball hits and base stealing and these types of things than we used to in the past. And so this is impacting pitcher skills. Pitcher skills used to be optimized around, let me choose something that's always in effect. Let me choose boss and finesse pitcher because those are always in effect for the purpose of avoiding the initial base runners. But the reality is people are still getting on base. So we were choosing to sacrifice cleaning up your mess, which is known to be a very strong skill, for the purpose of preventing that initial hit. But since people are getting on base, my prediction is we're going to see a resurgence of cleaning up your mess. Why? Because people are recognizing that you cannot always prevent the initial hit. Since the revamp, people are getting on base, and if they're getting on base, let's optimize our chance of getting them out without a score or not letting them come around. What's going to do that? It's cleaning up your mess without a doubt. There's no substitute. So I predict a resurgence of cleaning up your mess. Personally, I've put it on my number 5 pitcher in my rotation, and I'm seeing good results from it so far. I cross my finger that it will continue to give me good results. Okay, moving on. The other thing that has shaken up things significantly is what we talked about earlier, ability scaling or stat scaling, if you want to call it that, um, is really strong. The removal of the glass ceiling, the ability to scale these things is really impactful. And consequently, the revamp of Ace and 5 tool player is really strong. Now, research has been done, and I would like somebody, if you have a link to it and can credit the proper person, please add a comment below because I want to credit the guy who actually did this research. But somebody did some research to determine that if you train your player properly, you can get up to plus 18 added to each of your skills. That's with a level 8 5 tool player. Level 7 you're max out at 16, but it's still substantial. So people are training their players to activate this. Now, realistically, the only ones who are actually able to get to the plus 18 level are supreme players. Subset of supreme players in which they don't really have any. Tony Gwynn is an example. Um, Piazza, I managed to activate plus 18 with Piazza. So teams are starting to try and slot these into the lineups to utilize 5 tool player. Now, that being the case, if the trend continues, it might be recognized as being overpowered, and we might see this skill get nerfed. But for now, people are starting to use more supreme players with 5 tool player. And how to actually activate the plus 18 is a little bit tricky. I will cover it in a separate video, and hopefully by that time I can credit the proper person. I want to point to some of the spreadsheets or a table that he built out for this, and arm people who are not familiar with how to do this. Okay, so final thing is people are starting to look at using laser beam and see if that can improve their defense in some scenarios. And we're seeing mixed results with it. Some teams are swear by it, are seeing great results for their pitching, lowered ERAs, and others are not. So this one's still out on the table. This one's active right now. Don't know if this one's actually fruitful or not, but we might see a a surgence in laser beam usage. Okay, so that's it for what I have to talk about here. I would love to hear if you think I'm off on any of my ratings. I know I am. I know people are going to refute some of the things I had to say, but I welcome it. Please let's talk about it. Give me your feedback. If you have references to that spreadsheet, or sorry, to the table and the guy who did the research on 5 tool, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope some of you have found this useful, and thanks for dropping by, and hopefully we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks.